Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be doing a last couple of reviews for some books from the Walter Scott Prize longlist. So if you don't know what the Walter Scott Prize is, it is a prize for historical fiction that runs every year and that I read along with every year. So every year I read the whole shortlist and some of the long list. And today I have two books to review for you. One that didn't make the shortlist but made the long list, The Two Roberts by Damien Barr, and one that did make the shortlist, Once the Deed is Done by Rachel Seifert. Now, the winner of the Walter Scott Prize long list was announced, I guess, probably 10 days ago now when you see this video. I tried very hard to avoid seeing on social media who had won the prize before I filmed this video, but I didn't manage to. But regardless of that, we're going to pretend I don't know yet, and I'm going to review these two books and then talk about my overall thoughts about the long list and the short list, who I would like to win, etc., and then, you know, who actually won. So let's start off with The Two Roberts, which made the long list, as I said, but not the short list. So The Two Roberts by Damien Barr is a novel about two real historical figures, two artists, Bobby McBride and Robert Colquhoun. I think that might be how you say his surname, but I'm not entirely certain. Anyway, these two artists, Bobby and Robert, meet in Glasgow in the 1930s at art school, and we follow them in this novel over the course of, I guess, 20, 30 years of their lives. In the first section of the book, we are following them over the course of a year or two while they're at art school and looking at the slow, tender process of the two of them falling in love. And then the rest of the novel spans a few decades as we sort of see various vignettes of their life over time. And the book looks at, you know, early to mid 20th century history and the sort of shifts going on in art and the lives of artists at that point in time, as well as the history of homosexuality throughout the point in time, and how Robert and Bobby deal with being in a relationship at a time when that is not always accepted and is more accepted in different circles than others, and the sort of danger that places them in at various points. And it also looks at Scottishness and Scottishness versus Englishness and class as well. And both Robert and Bobby are sort of the two working class kids in their art school. And I thought those elements were looked at really, really well. It is, at its heart, I would say, a love story, and the story of a love that is tested very hard by the circumstances these two men find themselves in, and by their own sort of temperaments as well, I suppose. I have slightly mixed feelings about The Two Roberts as a novel. I really enjoyed the reading experience and I found it a very powerful read, but it was really a novel of two halves for me. So the first, like, 40%, I guess, the first, like, 140 pages of The Two Roberts is, as I said, about the two Roberts falling in love at art school, and I thought that section was just perfect. Like, that for me was absolute 5-star, wonderful, a really, really powerful, tender story that was really sort of zoomed in, just focused on these two men over a relatively short period of time in a way that just worked beautifully. But the rest of the novel is quite different. As I said, it sort of goes almost into vignette territory, with some very, very short chapters, where we move through time at quite a pace, and where we're a lot more zoomed out, sometimes following the two Roberts in letters between them and their friends, sometimes sort of jumping several years at a time. And I found that worked less well for me. And I don't really know whether I would have preferred just a novella about the two Roberts falling in love at art school, or whether I would have preferred a, like, 500-page epic that looked at all of their lives in as much detail as the art school section. But I did feel that the second half was a bit more zoomed out. And the second half is also, I guess, in some ways less hopeful. There are moments of hope in it, and I thought the ending was very powerful, and the sort of love that the two Roberts share despite so many things going wrong, I thought was really, really powerfully drawn. But I do feel that the second half is a tougher read, both emotionally and in terms of how compelling it is. Like, I found the first half very compact and tight and focused, and the second half is a bit more spread out, which tends to be less my preference in literature. So I guess I had slightly mixed thoughts on The Two Roberts. Overall, thought it was a really, really strong novel, would highly recommend, very powerful read, really, really interesting story. But I did love the first sort of 40%, the first section, more than the rest of it. You know, I suppose at the 100-page mark, I was like, this is a new 5-star. I love this as much as my favourite books from the Walter Scott Prize longlist this year, The Matchbox Girl and The Pretender. And then by page 200, I wasn't feeling quite the same way, but I did still think it was a really strong novel. and I definitely would have put it on the shortlist over some of the books that did make the shortlist. So those are my thoughts on the two Roberts, and now let's move on to Once the Deed is Done by Rachel Seifert. This is a really interesting novel that is set in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, and sort of in the weeks and months after Germany is defeated. And it's set in Germany near a small rural village. And we are following both the village itself and some of the people within it, and also a local Red Cross camp that springs up at the end of the war. Within this camp, we are chiefly following a Red Cross officer called Ruth, who has come from London to Germany in order to help deal with all of the displaced people who are in Germany at the end of the Second World War. The majority of the people she's dealing with are from Poland and Ukraine, and they were forcibly taken from their homes and brought to Germany in order to work in munitions factories. But there are also lots of other people from different parts of Europe, all of whom have been transported to Germany to work in munitions factories and treated terribly while there. And now the war is over, and Ruth and her colleagues are in charge of trying to keep these people healthy and eventually relocate them back to the countries they were from. Although some of them are now more resistant to the idea of going back, now that it seems that Stalin and the USSR will have control over their countries. So we are following Ruth, the Red Cross officer, and some of the displaced people within the camp that she is overseeing. But we are also following several of the villagers in the nearby village, looking at how they feel about this Red Cross camp being nearby, how they have felt about the war. Some of these people were very much against the Nazi regime, some of them were not, some of them have complicated feelings about how much they did or didn't stand up to what was happening. We're also following some children who sort of don't really have a proper grasp of what has been going on. And over the several months that the novel is set, we are following all of these characters, and beneath it all runs the sort of undercurrent of atrocity of what has happened during the Second World War, and the things that some of the villagers know that they are not willing to speak about and confront. And it's a really, really powerful, interesting novel. I feel like I've read quite a lot of novels about the Second World War, but I don't think I've read any novels before about the very immediate aftermath in Germany. I have seen one play. The Land of the Living is a play by David Lamb, set in Germany in 1945, following a UN worker, randomly also called Ruth, who is looking into and trying to trace many children who were stolen from Poland and other occupied countries during the Second World War, taken to Germany and adopted by German families, some of whom did remember their birth parents, some of whom didn't. And that play, The Land of the Living, is really, really powerful and interesting, and I think deals with a lot of similar themes to Once the Deed is Done. I kind of feel like I would have loved Once the Deed is Done more if I hadn't seen The Land of the Living. I think on balance, I probably preferred the play The Land of the Living, and I did keep comparing them in my head as I was reading Once the Deed is Done because they had a lot of things in common. But I found Once the Deed is Done, as I said, a really interesting novel, very, very powerful, very thematically interesting, and with some incredible moments, especially towards the end. I will say that you follow a lot of different characters. Ruth is the sort of closest you have to a main character, but you're also following a lot of other people, and some of the other people you follow, you only follow for a chapter or two, or you follow quite intermittently, so I feel like it's a bit harder to get to know them. I felt mostly invested in Ruth and also in the story of one of the sort of teenage girls who lives in the village. I thought her story was quite powerful, but there were a few moments when I would have liked more time with some of the other characters, and maybe to focus on fewer characters in more depth. But overall, I did think it was a really strong novel, a really powerful one, and I can definitely see why it made the shortlist. I was trying to think as I sort of set out to make this video which novel I liked better of the two Roberts and Once the Deed is Done. And I feel like I enjoyed reading the two Roberts more and probably sort of liked it more as a book, but I think Once the Deed is Done is probably the more perfect novel, I suppose. So yeah. So those are the last two books I wanted to review today. And that means that overall I have read 9 books from the 12-book long list. So I didn't read the whole long list, but I did read the whole short list, and 4 books that made the long list but not the short list. Of the 9 that I've read, I'm going to do a quick ranking for you. And at number 9, in last place, I'm going to put Venetian Vespers, which was a book that was on the long list but not the short list, and I really, really didn't like at all. At number 8, I'm probably going to put Sea Scraper. This one did make the short list, and it just wasn't my cup of tea. It was just much too literary for me. It was an interesting novel. I sort of enjoyed the reading experience, but I finished it, you know, not having got much out of it. I think that's very much a personal taste thing. As I said, it was just a bit too literary for my taste, a bit too sort of unfocused and quiet. At number 7, I'm going to put Ben Beckler, another book that made the shortlist. This was an interesting one, but it was very short and intense, and I didn't get that much out of it. And it's one of those novels that has a very unlikable protagonist, and sometimes you just don't really want to be in their heads. So yeah, slightly mixed feelings on Ben Beckler. I will leave all of my reviews down below because I've obviously spoken about all of these books at much greater length. At number 6, I would put Eden Glassy, which is on the long list, didn't make the short list. It's a dual narrative, and I was definitely invested in one narrative more than in the other, but overall I found it a really interesting novel. I've been umming and ahhing quite a lot about the placing of numbers 3 to 5, but I think at 5 I'm going to put Once the Deed is Done, which, as I've just said, made the shortlist. I thought this was a really, really interesting novel, but I think the books I'm going to place at 3 and 4, I just got a bit more out of. At number 4, I'm going to put Helm. As I think I said in my review, Helm had a sort of slightly too ambiguous ending for my personal taste, but I did think it was a really interesting novel. Very playful and interesting and unique, and I just really enjoyed the reading experience. At number 3, I'm going to put The Two Roberts. As I said, I did love the first half more than the second, but I did find it a really powerful novel, and those sort of like first 140 pages were just absolute perfection. So I did really enjoy The Two Roberts. And now we come to my top 2, both of which did make the shortlist, and both of which were my sort of only 5-star reads from the Walter Scott Prize longlist this year. In general, this year's longlist has been less to my taste than last year's. Last year's I had like 7, maybe even 8 5-stars from the longlist, and I think 7 books from the long list made my like favorite books of the year video at the end of the year, and that will not be happening this year. The long list just was less suited to my taste this year, I guess. Of course, there are 3 books from the long list I didn't read. Maybe I'd have loved them, but anyway, maybe I'll read them at some point, we'll see. But there were 2 books from the Walter Scott Prize long list, and indeed from the shortlist this year, that will be making my favourite books of the year videos, and that I absolutely loved, and they were The Pretender and The Matchbox Girl. I love these books probably equally, maybe equally. The Pretender is fantastic and playful and fun and irreverent and dark and just like excellent in every way. And The Matchbox Girl is powerful and timely, and just so emotionally engaging. I sped through both The Pretender and The Matchbox Girl. Both of them just completely compelled me. I loved both of these books so much, and they're very, very different novels, but they're both quite like playful with language and storytelling, and they both are at their heart coming of age stories, I suppose, and I really loved that about both of them. I was trying to think last week before the winner was announced and before I accidentally spotted who the winner was, like which I would rather win, The Pretender or The Matchbox Girl, and thinking it over, I decided that I would rather The Matchbox Girl win, I think, because I think it is the more sort of timely and important novel, perhaps. Though I love both of them very much, and I would highly, highly recommend both of them. And I think The Matchbox Girl is a tougher read than The Pretender, which is not to say The Pretender doesn't have some darkness in it, it really does, but The Matchbox Girl is a tougher read, but it is truly fantastic. And so therefore I was delighted to see that The Matchbox Girl did win. It did win. I'm so pleased because I just think it's fantastic, and I just hope a lot of people read it because I thought it was amazing. I was so pleased to see that it won. So as I said, even though this Walter Scott Prize long list was not necessarily hugely to my taste, my favourite book from the long list, or one of my 2 favourite books from the long list, the book I wanted to win, won, which is lovely. And doesn't happen every year. There has been one previous Walter Scott year where the book I wanted to win won, and that was maybe 2022. It was the year that News of the Dead by James Robertson won, because I love that book very, very much. And I was very glad to see that win. But, you know, many years my favourite book doesn't win, but this year I'm so pleased to see The Matchbox Girl win, because I just think it's incredible and I highly, highly recommend it. As I said, I will leave my reviews of all of the books down below because I am not talking about them in much detail here, and I have done previously, but I highly, highly recommend The Matchbox Girl and also The Pretender, both of which are amazing. In previous years, I have sometimes made my own like personal shortlist from the long list, but to be honest, if I were to make a personal shortlist from this long list, it would just be The Matchbox Girl and The Pretender. And those are the 2 books that I recommend the most. You will probably get a good sense from watching my reviews whether some of the other books might be particularly to your taste, but it was those 2 that were the absolute standouts for me this year. That is all for my Walter Scott Prize videos in 2026. Do please let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books from the Walter Scott Prize longlist this year, and what you thought of them. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.